The restaurant went silent the moment the Mafia boss lifted his fork. Silvio Romano had survived wars, betrayals, and assassinations for over 40 years. But tonight, death was sitting quietly on his plate. Then a scream shattered the room. "Don't eat it." A small, soaking wet girl stood at the entrance, barefoot, shaking, eyes burning with pure terror. Guns were drawn instantly. One word from Silvio and she would disappear forever. Instead, he froze. "What did you say?" he asked calmly. "There's poison in your food," the girl whispered. "I saw the man who put it there." The room held its breath. Then she said something that made even the most feared man in the city feel cold. "He tried to poison me yesterday, too." In that moment, Silvio realized this wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was a message. And the key to unraveling everything was a homeless child standing right in front of him. The restaurant fell into a silence so complete it felt unnatural, as if even the air itself had frozen in fear. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over polished mahogany tables. But no one moved. No one breathed. At the center of it all sat Silvio Romano, the most feared man in the city, his posture flawless, his expression unreadable, his fork suspended inches above a plate of perfectly prepared food. For 40 years, Silvio Romano had survived everything this world could throw at him: gang wars, betrayals, federal investigations, assassination attempts disguised as accidents. He had buried enemies, friends, even brothers in all but blood. He had learned one simple rule early in life: hesitation gets you killed. And yet, for the first time in decades, he hesitated. Across the room stood a little girl. She was thin, drenched from the rain, barefoot on marble floors that cost more than most people's homes. Her clothes clung to her fragile frame, too large, too worn, as if borrowed from a life that never truly belonged to her. Her dark hair was tangled, her lips pale, but her eyes, those eyes were sharp, terrified, and painfully honest. "I saw him," she said again, her voice trembling but firm. "I saw the man put something into your food." The words scythed through the room like a blade, in a single, practiced motion. Guns appeared in the hands of Silvio's men. Safety clicks echoed softly, a deadly chorus that required no further explanation. The girl flinched, instinctively raising her arms as if she had done this before, as if fear was something she knew too well. One nod from Silvio Romano, one careless gesture, and she would vanish. No body, no questions, no consequences. This was how his world worked. But Silvio did nothing. He remained perfectly still, his fork still hovering, his dark eyes locked onto the girl as if she were a puzzle he had not yet solved. He had seen liars beg for mercy before. He had seen actors deliver performances worthy of applause in courtrooms and back alleys alike. But this child was not acting. Fear radiated from her, raw and unpolished, yet beneath it was something else: resolve. "What's your name?" Silvio finally asked, his voice low, controlled, dangerous in its calm. The question alone startled the room. No one spoke to him without permission. Certainly not children. "Luna," she whispered. "My name is Luna." The name settled into the silence, fragile and unassuming, yet it echoed louder in Silvio's mind than any gunshot. Luna took a hesitant step forward, water dripping from her sleeves onto the pristine floor. No one stopped her. No one dared. "He's tall," she continued, swallowing hard. "He wears expensive suits, but they don't fit him right, like he buys them too big. He has brown hair, turning gray here." She lifted her hand, pointing to the side of her own head. "And he has a scar. Right here." Her small finger hovered between her thumb and index finger. Silvio's blood turned to ice. That scar was not a coincidence. It was not common. It was a mark he remembered all too well, a memory burned into his past with glass, blood, and fury. 20 years ago, during a brutal dispute over territory, Silvio had driven a broken bottle into a man's hand as a warning. A man who had once been his closest partner. A man who, according to every official record, was dead. Anthony Duca. The fork clattered softly against the plate as Silvio finally lowered his hand. It was the first sound anyone had made in what felt like an eternity. He pushed the dish away, suddenly repulsed by it, as though death itself had taken physical form upon porcelain. "That man," Silvio said quietly, never breaking eye contact with Luna. "What else did he do?" Luna hesitated, glancing nervously at the armed men surrounding her, then back at Silvio. "Yesterday, he came to where I sleep. Under the bridge, near the old factory, he brought food, said he wanted to help." Her voice cracked slightly. "But I saw him put something in it when he thought I wasn't looking. I didn't eat it." A murmur rippled through the room. This was no random act. This was methodical, calculated. "He was on the phone," Luna added, as if realizing the weight of her words only now. "He kept saying the timing had to be perfect, that the old man would be here tonight." "The old man?" Silvio closed his eyes for a brief second, a rare fracture in his iron composure. That was what Anthony Duca used to call him, a joke between equals, brothers forged by the same violent streets. Hearing it now felt like a ghost whispering in his ear. Slowly, deliberately, Silvio turned his gaze away from Luna and scanned the table where his most trusted men sat. Marco, who had stood beside him for 25 years, Vincent, who had taken bullets in his name, Eddie, who knew every secret buried in the numbers. If Luna was telling the truth, then someone here had spoken. Someone had opened the door for a man who was supposed to be buried. Trust, he realized, was far more fragile than power. "What made you come here?" Silvio asked Luna softly, his tone shifting in a way no one had ever heard before. "Why warn me?" Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. "Because he tried to kill me. And because nobody should die like that. Not knowing, not scared." She paused, her voice barely audible. "My mama died scared." Something twisted painfully in Silvio's chest, a feeling he had buried long ago, beneath layers of violence and ambition, stirred unwillingly to life, compassion, guilt, recognition. He stood, towering over Luna, and the room tensed again, but instead of anger, his expression held something else entirely: curiosity, and perhaps something dangerously close to care. He turned sharply to his men. "Test the food." The command snapped them back into motion. Within minutes, the results came back, whispered urgently into Silvio's ear. His jaw tightened, his hand curling into a fist. The poison was potent, lethal, enough to kill 3 grown men. Silvio looked down at Luna, this small, shivering child who had walked into a lion's den armed with nothing but truth, and understood the gravity of what had just occurred. This was not merely an attempt on his life. It was a declaration of war. And the first move had been stopped not by his empire, not by his guns or his wealth, but by a girl the world had forgotten. Death had paused in a heartbeat, and nothing would ever be the same again. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel to enjoy many more heart-stirring stories every week. The plate was taken away, sealed, treated like a loaded weapon rather than a meal. Life in Silvio Romano's world continued as it always had: efficient, silent, ruthless, but something unseen had shifted beneath the polished surface. The danger was no longer abstract. It had a face, a name buried in the past, and a small witness standing barefoot on cold marble floors. Silvio watched Luna from across the room as his men moved around them. She sat rigidly on the edge of a chair far too large for her, hands folded in her lap as if she were afraid to touch anything. Someone had draped a jacket over her shoulders, one of his. She realized, the fabric heavy with a scent of clean linen and something darker, harder to name. Power, perhaps, or survival. She pulled it closer without thinking, as though warmth could be borrowed along with protection. "Get the restaurant cleared," Silvio ordered calmly. No sirens, no noise. His voice carried the kind of authority that didn't need volume to be obeyed. One by one, the doors closed. The outside world vanished. What remained was a private kingdom holding its breath. Only when the last waiter was gone did Silvio approach her. He lowered himself into the chair opposite Luna, a deliberate choice that drew quiet astonishment from his men. He did not tower over her. He did not intimidate. He met her at eye level, and in doing so, broke another unspoken rule. "You said he came to you yesterday," Silvio said, his tone measured. "Tell me exactly where." Luna hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the jacket. Under the bridge by the old factory, the place with the broken lights. She glanced up, meeting his gaze with surprising steadiness. He knew I was there. That single sentence carried a weight Silvio did not ignore. People like Luna survived by being invisible. If Anthony Duca had found her, it meant he had been watching for longer than anyone realized. "Did he ask you anything?" Silvio pressed. She shook her head. "No, he just talked. On the phone. A lot." Luna frowned slightly, as if replaying the memory. He kept saying things like Phase 1 and don't rush it. Like he wasn't worried at all. Silvio leaned back, folding his hands slowly. Anthony had always been reckless, driven by impulse and pride. But this version, this ghost who spoke of phases and patience, felt unfamiliar. More dangerous. Marco stepped closer, his voice low. "Boss, we checked the perimeter. No sign of surveillance now. But whoever sent her knew our schedule." Silvio nodded once. He already knew what that meant. This was no longer about a single assassination attempt. Someone had peeled back the layers of his operation and found the softest point of entry not through money, not through force, but through a child no one would suspect. Luna shifted uncomfortably. "Am I in trouble?" she asked quietly. The question landed harder than any threat. Silvio had heard grown men beg for mercy, had watched them bargain their lives with secrets and blood. But Luna's voice held no manipulation, only a simple, exhausted fear born from experience. "No," Silvio said after a pause. "You're not—" It was the truth, and yet it was also a promise one he wasn't entirely sure he could keep. A medic entered, crouching beside Luna to check her temperature. Her pulse. She flinched at the touch, instinctively recoiling. But Silvio placed a hand lightly on the table, a silent reassurance. She noticed. Her breathing slowed. "She hasn't eaten properly in days," the medic murmured. "And she's freezing. Prepare something safe," Silvio said. "Nothing from tonight." As Luna was led gently toward a side room, Silvio remained seated, his gaze distant. Memories he had spent a lifetime suppressing stirred uninvited. Hunger, cold, sleeping where no one would look for you. He had clawed his way out of that life with violence and ambition, swearing never to be powerless again. And yet here was Luna, reminding him that power did not always protect the innocent. Vincent spoke up, breaking the silence. "If Duca's alive." "Boss, then half our history is a lie." "Yes," Silvio replied, "and lies have consequences." Minutes later, Luna returned wearing dry clothes that still smelled faintly of detergent. She held a small bowl in her hands, steam rising gently. She didn't eat right away. Instead, she looked at Silvio, as if waiting for permission she had never been given before. "It's all right," he said. "You're safe here." She took her first bite slowly, cautiously, as though expecting it to be taken away. Silvio watched her without comment. Every instinct he had told him this was dangerous. Protecting witnesses was not how men like him survived, but sending her back into the streets felt unthinkable. "Why did you really come back tonight?" he asked softly. Luna swallowed, considering. "Because when I didn't eat the food yesterday, I knew he'd try again. And I thought, if he was going to hurt someone, it shouldn't be a stranger who never got a chance to know." The words settled between them, fragile and sincere. Silvio felt something shift again, deeper this time. A realization he had avoided his entire life pressed against his chest. The most meaningful choices were often the ones that endangered everything else. A phone buzzed quietly in Marco's hand. He glanced at the screen, then at Silvio. "Boss? We just lost contact with one of our dock supervisors." Silvio's eyes darkened. The timing was too perfect. Anthony was not waiting. He was moving. Luna noticed the change instantly. "It's starting, isn't it?" she asked. Silvio did not answer right away. He stood, straightening his jacket, the weight of command settling back onto his shoulders. "Yes," he said at last. "And whether I like it or not, you're already part of it." Luna looked down at her bowl, then back up at him. There was fear there, but also resolve. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. You didn't?" Silvio replied. "You stopped it. For now. Outside." The night pressed in, heavy with rain and secrets. In situ, an empire quietly prepared for a war that had begun not with gunfire, but with a child's courage and a truth that refused to stay buried. Night settled heavily over the city, pressing against the windows of Romano's restaurant like an uninvited witness. The rain had stopped, but the streets below still glistened, reflecting distorted lights that reminded Silvio of fractured truths. Nothing was as clean as it appeared from a distance. Inside, the air had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by a quiet tension that clung to every breath. Luna sat beside him now, no longer trembling, but far from calm. The food had given her strength, yet it was her silence that unsettled Silvio the most. She was listening, watching, absorbing a world she should never have been forced to understand. Marco returned from the hallway, his face tight, no signal from Johnny's phone. He said, "Last ping was near Pier 17. Silvio didn't need to ask who Johnny was. Everyone in the room knew. Johnny Marinette had been loyal since the early days, when loyalty still meant something personal, if Anthony Duca had reached him. It meant the past wasn't merely haunting Silvio, it was dismantling him piece by piece. Anthony always liked the docks, Silvio said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. He said the sea reminded him that everything eventually disappears. Luna looked up. He mentioned the water, she said after a moment. Said it washes away mistakes. The words tightened something deep in Silvio's chest. Anthony had always believed that erasing the past was the same as escaping it. Silvio had learned the harder lesson that buried things had a way of resurfacing, sharper and more dangerous than before. He stood and began pacing slowly, his mind working through patterns, timelines, betrayals. Someone had helped Anthony fake his death. Someone had maintained the lie for 15 years. And now, someone was feeding him information again. The enemy was not just a man returned from the dead. It was trust, rotting quietly from within. "Luna," Silvio said gently, stopping in front of her, "did he ever notice you watching him?" She nodded. "Once." He smiled. Not a nice smile. Like he already knew I wouldn't tell anyone. That was the moment Silvio understood something crucial. Anthony had seen Luna not as a risk, but as a non-entity, invisible, harmless. He had underestimated her, just as the world always did, and in that arrogance lay opportunity. Vincent broke the silence. "Boss, with respect, keeping the girl close makes her a target." Silvio met his gaze. Sending her away makes her a corpse. No one argued after that. They moved to a secure room deeper inside the building, a place designed for negotiations that never existed on paper. Luna walked beside Silvio without being asked. At some point, she had reached for his sleeve, holding on lightly, as if afraid he might disappear too. The contact was small, almost accidental, but Silvio felt it like a quiet promise neither of them had spoken aloud, in the privacy of the room. Silvio studied her again, not as a witness, not as bait, but as a child who had crossed his path for a reason he did not yet understand. "You're observant," he said. "That's rare," Luna shrugged. "When you're alone a lot, you learn to notice things. It's how you stay alive." The simplicity of the statement unsettled him more than any threat. He had built an empire to ensure survival, yet this child had mastered it without power, without protection. Only awareness and instinct. A phone rang. Marco answered, his voice hushed. When he looked up, his expression had changed. "We found Johnny's car, empty, engine still warm." The message was clear. Anthony was not leaving room for hesitation. He was forcing Silvio to move, to react, to make mistakes. Silvio closed his eyes briefly. In another life, he might have admired the strategy. Luna watched him closely. "You're scared," she said softly. The room froze. No one had ever spoken to Silvio Romano like that. Fear was something he inspired, not something he possessed. Yet he did not deny it. "Yes," he admitted. "Not for myself." She understood immediately. Her grip on his sleeve tightened. "Then don't send me away," she said. "If he thinks I don't matter, maybe that's why I do." The words struck him with a quiet, devastating clarity. Anthony had built his plan on assumptions on the belief that only powerful players changed the game. He would never anticipate a child shaping the outcome. Silvio crouched in front of Luna, lowering himself again to her level. "This path isn't kind," he said. "Once you walk it, you don't come back the same." She met his gaze without flinching. I was already changed. Something in Silvio broke open then, not weakness, but resolve. He had spent his life protecting himself from attachments, from the kind of responsibility that demanded more than money or violence. And yet, in this moment, he felt the unmistakable pull of something dangerously human. "Anthony thinks he's hunting me," Silvio said slowly. "But ghosts forget one thing. The living adapt." Outside the room, preparations began. Calls were made, doors locked, lines drawn, and somewhere in the city, a man who should have stayed dead was about to learn that the smallest truth he had ignored might be the one that destroyed him. The city did not sleep that night. It merely pretended to, hiding its movements behind dim streetlights and closed shutters. From the secure room beneath the restaurant, Silvio Romano felt the rhythm of it through the walls, the way a man who had lived too long among predators learned to sense danger without seeing it. The war had not begun with gunfire, but it was moving all the same, quiet, deliberate, unforgiving. Luna sat on the edge of a leather couch, her feet barely touching the floor. She listened as Silvio gave orders, her dark eyes following every shift in tone, every pause that meant more than the words themselves. She was learning the language of power without realizing it, absorbing the gravity of a world that demanded payment for every breath. "We changed the schedule," Silvio said. "Everything moves forward 6 hours. Anyone who questions it goes on the list." Marco nodded, already relaying instructions. Vincent stood near the door, arms crossed, his gaze never straying far from Luna. He didn't trust her presence, not because he thought she was dangerous, but because he understood something Silvio was only beginning to accept. Once a child is seen by the wrong people, there is no going back. Luna shifted, the leather creaking softly. "He won't expect that," she said, surprising them all. Silvio turned to her. "Why do you think so?" "He likes things neat," Luna replied after a moment. "He kept saying everything had to happen exactly when he planned it, like a story he'd already written. Anthony Duca had always been like that, a man who believed control meant certainty, who mistook patience for invincibility." Silvio felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. If Anthony had underestimated Luna once, he would do it again. A call came in. Marco's expression darkened as he listened. "We confirmed it. Johnny was taken alive. No ransom demand yet." Silvio's jaw tightened. Alive meant leverage. It meant Anthony wanted Silvio to know how far this had gone. The past wasn't just knocking at his door, it was sitting inside his house, rearranging the furniture. Luna's shoulders stiffened. "Is it my fault?" she asked quietly. The question cut through the room. Silvio approached her slowly, kneeling in front of her once more. He was aware of the irony that a man who ruled through fear now found himself choosing his words carefully with a child. "No," he said firmly. "What's happening started long before you walked into that restaurant." She searched his face as if looking for cracks. "But he saw me. He knows I was there." "Yes," Silvio admitted. "Which means he thinks you matter now." That truth settled heavily between them. To matter in Silvio's world was dangerous. To matter to Anthony Duca was worse. They moved her again before dawn, this time to a private residence on the outskirts of the city. The house was quiet, shielded by trees and silence, the kind of place meant for hiding rather than living. Luna watched the gates close behind them, a soft sound that felt final. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old books and polished wood. It was safer than anywhere she had been in months, yet her unease grew instead of fading. Safety, she was learning, could be temporary. Silvio noticed. "You don't like it here. It's too quiet," she said. "Quiet places don't stay safe for long." He studied her, struck by how instinctively she understood impermanence. "You shouldn't have had to learn that." "But I did," Luna replied. "So now what?" "Now." The word carried weight. Silvio had spent his life planning for tomorrow, for next year, for contingencies no one else could see. But this moment demanded something different. It demanded responsibility. "We wait," he said, "and we watch." Hours passed. As the sun climbed, news filtered in small disruptions, minor inconsistencies, a delayed shipment, a missing vehicle, signs of Anthony's hand moving pieces across the board. Silvio countered each one, adjusting, redirecting, refusing to be predictable. Then, in the early afternoon, the trap was sprung. Vincent's voice crackled through the phone. "Boss, we've got movement near the residence. 2 vehicles, no plates." Silvio's pulse quickened. He signaled for silence. Luna felt it instantly. The shift in the air. She stood without being told. "They're here for me," she said. "Yes," Silvio replied. "And they won't get you." The sound came next a sharp crack, glass shattering somewhere above. Luna flinched as alarms erupted. Footsteps thundered. The illusion of safety collapsed in seconds. Vincent moved fast, ushering Luna behind a reinforced door. Silvio followed, his mind cold and clear. This was Anthony's message: nowhere was untouchable. They waited, seconds stretching painfully thin. Then silence again. Too sudden, too complete. A voice echoed faintly from outside, carried through a speaker. Calm, familiar. "Silvio," Anthony's voice said, smooth as ever. Still hiding behind walls, Luna's breath caught. She recognized it instantly. Silvio closed his eyes for a heartbeat. "You shouldn't have come," he said evenly. Anthony laughed softly. "You shouldn't have kept the girl." The line went dead. Moments later, Vincent returned, blood on his sleeve but alive. They pulled back. Just a warning. Silvio looked down at Luna. She was pale, shaken, but standing, unbroken. Anthony had shown his hand. He wanted Silvio afraid. He wanted Luna afraid. And he had failed. Silvio rested a hand on Luna's shoulder, grounding both of them. "This ends when I say it ends," he murmured. But in the quiet aftermath, Luna realized something terrifyingly clear. Being invisible had once kept her alive. Now that she had been seen, the price of survival had changed forever. The house no longer felt like a refuge. After the attack, silence became suspicious, every shadow a question without an answer. Silvio Romano stood by the window, watching the tree line beyond the gates, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. He looked older there, not weaker, but burdened by a truth he could no longer deny. Anthony Duca was no longer reacting. He was directing the tempo of this war. Behind him, Luna sat cross-legged on the couch, her hands wrapped around a warm cup she had barely touched. The shock had faded from her face, replaced by something far more dangerous understanding. She had seen how quickly safety could dissolve, how easily walls could be breached. And she had seen, for the first time, that Silvio could bleed. "They didn't come to take me," she said quietly. Silvio turned. "No. They wanted you to know they could." Yes. The simplicity of the exchange carried more weight than any argument. Anthony had escalated without firing a single bullet. He had announced that nowhere Silvio controlled was truly beyond his reach. More importantly, he had forced Silvio into a corner where every choice carried unacceptable consequences. Marco entered the room, his face grim. "We confirmed it. The vehicles were decoys. The real move happened downtown." Silvio's eyes narrowed. "Where? Pier 17, they hit one of our secondary warehouses. Fast and clean. No witnesses, of course." While Silvio had been busy protecting what mattered most to him, Anthony had taken something else momentum. The docks were not just territory, they were arteries. Disrupt them, and the entire operation would feel the strain. Luna lowered her cup. "He wanted you distracted." "Yes," Silvio said, and it worked. The admission surprised even himself. For decades, Silvio Romano had prided himself on seeing the whole board, on never letting emotion dictate strategy. Yet Luna's presence had shifted his center of gravity. Protecting her had become instinctive, almost reflexive, and Anthony had exploited that without hesitation. Vincent stepped closer. "Boss, we need to strike back. Hard. Show him he miscalculated." Silvio didn't respond immediately. His gaze drifted to Luna, who watched him carefully, as if sensing that the next decision would shape more than just the war. "No," Silvio said finally. "That's what he expects." Anthony wanted chaos. He wanted Silvio angry, reckless, chasing ghosts across the city. A frontal assault would only confirm that the trap had closed. We disappear, Silvio continued. For 48 hours, Marco frowned. Boss? We go dark, Silvio repeated. No visible movements, no retaliation. We let him think he's won this round. Silence followed. It was a dangerous strategy, one that went against every rule of dominance in their world. Power was maintained through presence. Absence invited vultures. Luna spoke before anyone else could object. He hates waiting, she said. Silvio looked at her. Why do you think that? Because when he talked on the phone, he kept checking his watch. Like time was the only thing he couldn't control. That was the crack Silvio had been searching for. Anthony's patience was performative, a mask worn over a deeper obsession with timing and precision. Deny him feedback, deny him reaction, and the mask would slip. Prepare the fallback routes, Silvio ordered. Pull everyone back into cells. No unnecessary movement. As his men dispersed, Silvio remained with Luna. The house felt too large now, its luxury hollow and impersonal. He gestured for her to follow him into a smaller study at the back, a room filled with books, old photographs, and the quiet remnants of a life rarely seen. Luna paused in front of one photograph in particular. It showed two young men standing by the water, arms slung over each other's shoulders, smiling with the careless confidence of those who believed the world was theirs to take. That's him, she said softly. Yes, Silvio replied. Before he became a ghost. Before you became this, she added, not accusing, simply observing. Silvio considered the image. Before choices hardened us into what we are. Luna turned to him. Do you think he can still change? The question was gentle, but it cut deeply. Silvio had asked himself the same thing more times than he cared to admit. Anthony had always believed change was something that happened to other people. I think, Silvio said slowly, that he's already chosen. Night fell again, heavier than before. Somewhere across the city, Anthony Duca waited for a reaction that did not come. Reports filtered in no counterattacks, no threats, no sudden shifts in territory. The silence unsettled him more than violence ever could. Back at the house, Luna slept fitfully in the study, curled on the couch with one of Silvio's coats pulled over her. Silvio sat nearby, keeping watch, his thoughts moving through possibilities like chess pieces. For the first time in years, he was not simply defending an empire. He was defending a future he had never planned for. A message arrived just before dawn, a single line, sent through a channel Anthony had used only once before. You're changing. That makes you predictable. Silvio deleted it without reply. He looked at Luna, sleeping peacefully for the moment, and understood the truth Anthony could not see. Change did not make a man predictable. It made him dangerous in new ways. Anthony believed he was still the hunter, tightening the circle, waiting for fear to force Silvio's hand. He did not yet realize that by drawing attention to Luna, by underestimating the smallest piece on the board, he had stepped into a game where instinct mattered more than control. And for the first time since this war began, Silvio Romano allowed himself a quiet, calculated thought. Anthony Duca was no longer setting the trap. He was walking into it. Dawn arrived without ceremony, a thin gray light slipping through the tall windows of the house like an apology that came too late. Silvio Romano had not slept. He stood in the study, jacket draped over the back of a chair, watching Luna breathe as she slept curled on the couch. In sleep, she looked younger, softer, stripped of the sharp awareness that had kept her alive. It unsettled him more than any threat Anthony Duca had made. This was the moment Silvio had been avoiding. Not the next move, not the counterattack, the decision. Marco arrived quietly, careful not to wake Luna. We're invisible, he reported. No hits, no leaks. Anthony's people are restless. Good, Silvio said. Restlessness leads to mistakes. Marco hesitated. There's something else. Our allies are asking questions. They think we're weak. Silvio's mouth curved into a humorless smile. Let them... Power. He had learned long ago, was not just about force. It was about choosing when not to display it. Anthony was waiting for proof that Silvio was still the man he remembered, angry, territorial, predictable. What Anthony did not understand was that the board had changed. Behind them, Luna stirred. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, instantly alert. "You're planning something," she said. Silvio turned to her. "Yes, something dangerous." "Yes." She accepted that with a small nod, then surprised him by asking, "Does it involve me?" The room went still. Marco looked away. Silvio did not. "Yes," Silvio said quietly, "but not the way you think." Luna studied his face, reading him the way she had learned to read adults on the street by what they didn't say. "You're going to use what he doesn't see," she said. "Me?" Silvio did not correct her. He knelt in front of her, resting his forearms on his knees. "Anthony believes you're a weakness, a liability. He thinks protecting you will slow me down." "And he's wrong," Luna said. "Yes," Silvio replied, "because he doesn't understand the difference between weakness and attachment." Luna swallowed. "What do you need me to do?" The question was offered without fear, without drama, just trust, and it terrified him. Silvio took a long breath. "I need you to remember everything. Every word he said, every habit, especially the small things." Her brow furrowed, like the watch. "Yes, and the way he pauses before lying." Silvio's eyes sharpened. "He does that," she nodded. "Just a second, like he's choosing which version of the truth to use." That detail settled into place like the final piece of a puzzle. Anthony's obsession with timing wasn't just strategic. It was psychological. He needed control, even over his own lies. "We're going to let him think he's won," Silvio said. "One more time," Marco stiffened. "Boss?" "Not publicly," Silvio continued. "Privately, he'll get information he believes is real. A meeting, a trade, something too perfect to ignore." Luna's eyes widened slightly. "And you want him to show up?" "Yes." Silence pressed in. What Silvio was proposing was dangerous even by their standards. Inviting Anthony closer meant exposing everything: territory, people, and the fragile line protecting Luna. "And if he realizes it's a trap?" Marco asked. Silvio's gaze dropped briefly to Luna. "Then I'll pay the price." That was the moment Marco understood. This was no longer about empire. Silvio had already chosen. Later that day, preparations began. A controlled leak was released through a channel Anthony had once trusted. A warehouse, an off-the-books exchange, a time window narrow enough to appeal to Anthony's obsession with precision. The bait was convincing because it was built from truth. Luna watched from the doorway as Silvio coordinated the operation, his voice calm, his movements deliberate. She had never seen someone command space the way he did, bending others' actions without raising his voice. It was frightening and strangely comforting. When he finally turned back to her, the room felt quieter. "Once this starts," he said, "there's no stepping back." Luna nodded. "I know. You don't have to do this," Silvio added. "I can still send you away, somewhere safe." She shook her head immediately. "He won't stop. Not for me. Not for you." Her voice softened. "And if running away worked, I wouldn't be here." The truth of that left no room for argument. That evening, Silvio took Luna out onto the terrace. The city stretched beneath them, lights flickering like distant stars. For a moment, the world looked almost peaceful. "My mother used to bring me places like this," Silvio said unexpectedly. "She said if you look at the city long enough, you forget how small you are." Luna leaned against the railing. "My mama said the opposite. She said it reminds you how many lives are happening at the same time." He smiled faintly. "She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Luna replied. "She would have liked you, not for what you are, for what you're trying to be." The words stayed with him long after she went inside. Night fell. Somewhere across the city, Anthony Duca received the message and smiled. Everything was aligning. Silvio was retreating, making concessions, protecting a child instead of his empire. Exactly the mistake Anthony had been waiting for. What he did not see was the truth unfolding beneath the surface. That the child he dismissed was the only one who truly understood him. That the man he believed he knew had already crossed a line he could never retreat from. When Silvio Romano chose Luna, he did not simply protect her. He rewrote the rules of the war, and once rewritten, they could never be restored. The warehouse sat at the edge of the river like a forgotten thought, its rusted walls soaked in fog and old secrets. From the outside, it looked abandoned, the kind of place no one cared enough to protect. That was precisely why Anthony Duca loved it. Neglect was camouflage, silence was invitation. Silvio Romano arrived 15 minutes early. He stood alone inside the vast space, hands in his coat pockets, listening to the slow drip of water echo through the concrete. The smell of oil and metal stirred memories he had buried years ago, nights spent building an empire out of patience and blood. Tonight was different. Tonight, he was not here to claim territory. He was here to end something. Across the city, Luna waited in the control room beneath the house, eyes fixed on the monitors. She had insisted on staying awake, had refused to be sedated or distracted. Silvio had argued once, then stopped. He had learned that underestimating her resolve was a mistake Anthony would soon make himself. "He's late," Vincent muttered, watching the feed from a hidden camera. Luna shook her head. "No. He wants to see if Silvio will wait," as if summoned by the observation. Headlights flared outside the warehouse. A black car rolled to a stop. The engine cut. The door opened. Anthony Duca stepped into the fog. He looked unchanged, immaculate suit, confident stride, the same faint smile that suggested the world was always slightly behind him. But Luna leaned closer to the screen. "He's nervous," she said. Vincent frowned. "How can you tell?" "He didn't bring an umbrella," Luna replied. "He hates rain." Anthony entered the warehouse slowly, his footsteps echoing. When he saw Silvio, his smile widened, genuine and sharp all at once. "You always were punctual," Anthony said. "I was afraid you'd send a messenger." Silvio didn't move. "I considered it. But you didn't," Anthony replied. "Which tells me two things. One, you're tired of hiding. And two," his gaze sharpened, "you're here because you care." Silvio exhaled softly. "You always confuse caring with losing control." Anthony laughed, shaking his head. "That's because, eventually, they become the same thing." They circled each other slowly. Like men reenacting an old ritual neither had truly left behind. Outside, the fog thickened, pressing against the windows like a held breath. "You made mistakes," Anthony continued, pulling back, going quiet. "You taught them you can bleed. I taught them patience," Silvio replied. "Something you never learned?" Anthony's smile faltered for just a second. On the monitor, Luna caught it. "There," she whispered. "That pause." Anthony stopped walking. "You think this ends well for you?" he asked. "You think protecting that girl makes you noble?" "It makes me honest," Silvio said. Anthony's eyes hardened. "You're choosing sentiment over survival." "No," Silvio said calmly. "I'm choosing evolution." The words seemed to irritate Anthony more than any threat. He stepped closer. "You were never meant to change." He said, "That's why you survived. Men like us don't get redemption." Silvio met his gaze evenly. "Men like us decide when the story ends." In the control room, alarms flickered. Vincent straightened. "We've got movement. Secondary teams approaching the perimeter." Luna's heart pounded, but her voice stayed steady. "He brought more people than he said he would." "Of course he did," Vincent muttered. Back in the warehouse, Anthony checked his watch unconsciously. "Time's up," he said. "You give me the girl, or this city burns." Silvio smiled then, not warmly, but with a quiet certainty that unsettled Anthony. "You already lost," he said. Anthony frowned. "What are you talking about?" "You came yourself," Silvio replied. "You couldn't help it." Realization flickered too late. The lights cut out. Darkness swallowed the warehouse, followed by the sharp click of doors sealing shut. Anthony cursed under his breath, reaching instinctively for a weapon that wasn't there. Emergency lights flared red, bathing the space in an eerie glow. Screens descended from the ceiling, flickering to life. Anthony turned slowly, eyes widening as he recognized the footage old transactions, recorded calls, names that had never existed on paper. "You always needed an audience," Silvio said from the shadows. "I just gave you one you can't silence." Anthony laughed, but it sounded strained. You think evidence scares me? No, Silvio replied. Exposure does. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder by the second. In the control room, Luna watched Anthony's face collapse from confidence into fury. He looked small then. Human. He's going to try to run, Vincent said. Luna shook her head. No, he'll try to bargain. Anthony turned, scanning for Silvio. You planned this with a child, he sneered. That's your legacy. Silvio stepped into the light. No, he said softly. She's my future. Anthony stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time that night. The man in front of him was no longer bound by old rules, old loyalties, old fears, and that terrified him. As police lights flooded the riverbank outside, Anthony Duca finally understood the truth. The trap had never been the warehouse. It had been his belief that Silvio Romano was still playing the same game. Far away, Luna let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The war wasn't over. But for the first time since she had walked into that restaurant, she felt something unfamiliar and fragile take root. Hope. The city woke to rumors instead of gunfire. By morning, Anthony Duca's name was everywhere and nowhere at once whispered in closed rooms, scrubbed from official records, replaced by phrases like ongoing investigation and internal collapse. His empire did not fall with an explosion. It unraveled, strand by strand, as men who had depended on his certainty suddenly found themselves without direction. Fear changed hands. Silence shifted owners. Silvio Romano watched it happen from a distance. He stood on the terrace as dawn broke, the city below washed clean by rain and sirens that had long since faded. For the first time in years, there was no immediate crisis demanding his attention, no orders to give, no fires to put out. The absence felt strange, almost unnatural, like stepping into a room after a noise you had grown used to suddenly stopped. Behind him, footsteps approached softly. Luna stopped beside him, wrapped in a thick sweater, her hair still damp from a hurried shower. She leaned against the railing, copying his posture without realizing it. Is it over? She asked. Silvio considered the question carefully. The war we knew is, he said. What comes next will be quieter. And harder. She nodded, understanding more than most adults ever would. People will want things from you. Yes, they already do, Luna said. I heard Marco on the phone. Silvio smiled faintly. Nothing escaped her anymore. Power creates gravity, he said. Everyone wants to stand close to it. Luna was silent for a moment. Then, quietly, what about me? The question carried no fear, just honesty. Silvio turned to face her fully. That, he said, is the only thing I'm certain about. Later that day, the house filled with movement again, not the frantic urgency of survival, but the deliberate rhythm of transition. Assets were reassigned, old alliances renegotiated. Some doors were closed permanently, others opened cautiously. Silvio did not reclaim territory with violence. He let vacuum do the work. In the criminal world, absence was often more powerful than force. Luna watched pieces shift from the edges, absorbing the lessons without being taught. She noticed which men Silvio trusted with silence, which ones needed reassurance, which ones avoided her gaze entirely. She was no longer invisible, but she was no longer powerless either. In the afternoon, Silvio took her out of the city. The drive was quiet, the kind that invited reflection. Buildings gave way to open roads, then trees, then water. When they stopped, Luna stepped out and stared. The house was smaller than the others, perched near a lake, sunlight dancing across its surface. It felt lived in, not fortified. There were no visible guards, no towering gates. This place, Luna hesitated. Is it safe? Silvio followed her gaze. Safe enough to breathe. They walked along the water's edge. Birds skimmed the surface, unbothered by human presence. Luna bent down, trailing her fingers through the lake, smiling despite herself. I've never lived anywhere quiet, she admitted. Neither have I, Silvio said. That's why I bought it. They sat on the dock, feet dangling above the water. The stillness felt earned, like a pause granted after something terrible had been survived. Will they come for you again? Luna asked softly. Eventually, Silvio replied. Power always attracts challengers. And you, she asked, will you keep fighting? Silvio thought of Anthony's face in the warehouse, of the man he had once been, of the man he had chosen not to remain. I won't fight the same way, he said. That chapter is closed. Luna nodded, satisfied. Good. As evening settled, Silvio received a final update. Anthony Duca would not be returning, whether through prison walls or quieter means. His reach had ended. The city was already adjusting, learning a new balance. That night, Luna couldn't sleep. Silvio found her sitting on the edge of the bed, knees drawn up, staring at nothing. Bad thoughts, he asked gently. She shrugged. Just thinking about who I was before all this. He sat beside her, careful not to crowd her. And who you are now, she considered it. Someone who survived. Someone who's still here. He nodded. That's enough. After a moment, she leaned her head against his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, trusting, heavy with meaning. Silvio didn't move. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future not built around contingency plans and exit strategies. A future where choices were not always made at gunpoint, where protection did not automatically mean destruction. Outside, the lake reflected the moon, unbroken and calm. The storm had passed. The wreckage was behind them. What remained was something fragile, untested, and profoundly dangerous in its own way. Peace. And for the first time in his life, Silvio Romano chose to believe it might last at least long enough to be lived. Spring arrived quietly, without asking permission. The lake thawed, the trees around the house softened into green, and the world seemed to stretch itself after a long, bruising winter. For Silvio Romano, the change felt unfamiliar. Seasons had always passed unnoticed in his life, marked only by shifting threats and rotating enemies. Now, time moved differently. It lingered. Luna noticed first. She stood at the window one morning, sunlight warming her face, watching birds return to the water. They came back, she said, as if announcing a small miracle. Silvio looked up from the table. They always do. She smiled. Still feels like a choice. That thought stayed with him. The city no longer demanded his presence the way it once had. Silvio had dismantled what needed dismantling, surrendered what no longer mattered, and built something quieter in the spaces left behind. His name still carried weight, but it no longer crushed everything beneath it. Power, he had learned, could exist without constant proof. Luna settled into routines that felt almost ordinary. School tutors came and went. She learned to swim in the lake, laughed freely, argued about books, and slept through the night more often than not. The sharp vigilance that once defined her softened, replaced by something gentler but no less strong. One afternoon, Silvio watched her run along the dock, hair flying, arms outstretched as if she could balance the world herself. He realized then how much had changed. She was no longer surviving. She was living. Later that evening, they sat together on the porch as the sky turned gold. Luna traced patterns on the wooden floor with her fingers, unusually quiet. You're thinking again, Silvio said. She nodded. About before. He waited. He had learned that silence, when given freely, invited honesty. I used to think people like me were just passing through, Luna said. Like we didn't belong anywhere long enough to leave marks. Silvio looked at her. And now, she hesitated. Now I'm scared to want things. The admission was soft but heavy. Silvio understood it well. Wanting was dangerous. Wanting created loss. Wanting doesn't make you weak, he said. It makes you invested. She glanced at him. Is that why you stayed? He didn't answer immediately. The truth deserved care. I stayed because leaving would have been easier. He said finally. And I'm tired of choosing easy. Luna absorbed that quietly. Weeks passed. Paperwork moved through invisible channels. Conversations happened behind closed doors. One morning, Silvio asked Luna to come with him into town. She noticed his careful tone, the way he checked his watch once, then stopped himself. They arrived at a modest building near the water. Inside, the air smelled like ink and old paper. Luna's steps slowed. Am I in trouble? She asked. half joking. No, Silvio replied. You're being given something. They sat across from a woman with kind eyes and practiced patience. Questions were asked gently. Answers were given honestly. Luna's hand found Silvio's without thinking. He didn't let go. When it was over, they walked back outside. The lake shimmered in the distance. So, Luna said carefully, what happens now? Silvio stopped, turned to her, and knelt so they were eye level. Now, he said, you have a choice. You always did. I just made sure it stayed yours. She searched his face, looking for traps, for conditions. She found none. And you, she asked, what do you want? Silvio felt the weight of that question more than any threat he had ever faced. I want to be here, he said. If you'll have me. Luna's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She smiled instead, bright and unguarded. Then stay. That night, the house felt warmer. They cooked together, clumsy and laughing, burning one dish and saving another. They ate by the window, listening to the lake breathe. Later, Luna fell asleep on the couch mid-sentence, a book open on her chest. Silvio covered her with a blanket and sat nearby, listening to the steady rhythm of a life no longer running from itself. Outside, the city continued. As cities always do, loud, hungry, endlessly unfinished. Somewhere, new players would rise, new conflicts would form. Silvio knew that. He wasn't naive. But this was real. In the months that followed, the house filled with small signs of permanence. Luna's drawings on the fridge, books stacked by the bed, a second toothbrush that was never removed. Silvio found himself learning things he had never bothered with before school schedules. Quiet celebrations. The art of listening without fixing. One evening, as they walked along the lake, Luna slipped her hand into his. Do you think the future stays? She asked. Silvio looked out at the water, at the way the sunset painted it in soft fire. Nothing stays forever, he said. But some things last long enough to matter. She squeezed his hand. That's okay. For a man who had once believed his story would end in violence or solitude, this felt like an ending written in a different language. Not loud, not dramatic, but whole. And as the night settled around them, Silvio Romano understood that the happiest endings were not the ones that erased the past. They were the ones that made it, finally, unmistakably worth surviving.